You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Land. This podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts Tiffany Cruikshank and Katya Bach as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the Yoga Medicine Podcast, and thank you for making time for us today.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for having me. I'm psyched to be here with you guys.
This is going to be an interesting conversation today, a topic that maybe not everybody wants to hear about. So let's dive right in. You are the founder and executive director of Her Future Coalition. So why don't you kick off by telling us what your nonprofit does and perhaps how its work intersects with that of the Yoga Medicine Saver Foundation, which some of our listeners will have heard of.
Her Future Coalition is an international nonprofit organization, and our mission is to combat sexual and gender-based violence. And more than that, to give survivors and very high-risk girls the tools to heal and really to take charge of their lives and have the resources that they can become and remain free and safe and independent for the rest of their lives. We've had the wonderful pleasure of working with the Yoga Medicine Saver Foundation for over 7 years. And together we have initiated some new programs, specifically around education and vocational training that leads to women's economic independence. So we've done some trips together. We've had some amazing times together with Tiffany and with different members of the community.
Yeah, awesome. I've heard you acknowledge and read it in your book too, that this is a topic, sexual and gender-based violence, that is really hard to hear about, partially because the stories are just heart-wrenching, and partly because the problem just seems so big and so systemic and so impossible to solve that I think a lot of us just sort of go, I don't want to hear about that. I don't want to think about that. There's nothing I can do about that. And you had a little of that reaction to begin with as well. And yet somehow you got from, oh, I don't really want to watch that film at the film festival about sexual and gender-based violence, to giving up your job, selling your home. Your husband gave up his job. This has become life-changing for you. How did you get from one state of mind to the complete opposite on this topic?
Well, first of all, I want to say if people are a little bit hesitant to join us in this conversation today, I can relate because that's exactly how I felt. And what I will say is that in the work that we do and in the way that I talk about it, we really try to stay on the side of hope and focusing on the transformations and the incredible things that survivors are doing, that we've been so blessed to be part of their journeys. And we stay away from sharing, really horrific details about sexual violence, because I think, as human beings, particularly as women, we can all imagine and relate, but as human beings, I think we all can imagine, and we don't really need to, share those horrific horror stories, but really more it's about what we're doing about it. And that really is the answer, and how I got from being very afraid of it to being, having it be my life, which is that I realized that once I dived in and was able to take action against it and stopped feeling helpless about it, but feeling like, wow, there's something I can really do here to assist these incredible people. That's when, for me, I became able to cope with it. But what did happen, as you mentioned, I was at a film festival. I had a very different career as a songwriter of music for film and television. And I got one of my songs into a film at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York City. So down I went with great excitement that, my life's going to change, because this was a really big step for me. I'd mostly been writing for soap operas. And all of a sudden, it was a feature film with the actress Emmy Rossum, who later became quite famous, and she was singing the title song. So down I went with all this excitement, also having a free ticket to see any movie at the film festival. The only movie in my available time slot was a movie called The Day My God Died. And certainly the title, is a little scary already. But there was a film about child sex trafficking between Nepal and India. And I was very hesitant to go. And indeed, I would not have gone had it not been the only available film in my available time slot. And I just felt, it would be really lame to go to this festival and not see any other film other than the one my son was in. And also, maybe I had some kind of intuitive sense that I needed to go see this and there was something there for me. I was afraid because I'm like, what am I going to be able to do about that? It feels so daunting and so awful and distressing. But actually, it was a wonderful film in that it showed so many people from all kinds of walks of life who were taking action against child sex trafficking. And some of them were just ordinary folks. They weren't necessarily, international development superstars or like super professional, but they were teachers and social workers and neighbors and moms and all kinds of people who were taking action in whatever way they could. And some of them were survivors who, after being rescued, were having the courage to go back into the places where they were exploited and rescue others, or to work at the border and stopping the cars. And that was what really got to me, is seeing all of these people taking action from so many different angles and directions, and some of them even after what they'd experienced and the stigmatization and suffering that they were still having to overcome every day. I thought, wow, there's got to be something that I can do. And I just started by starting, which has become my catchphrase, to the probably irritation of everyone I know because I say it constantly. But I really do feel like whatever you're trying to achieve in any area of life, or of your personal life, or changing a big social issues in the world, you just got to start somewhere. Start by starting and take that first step. And it's going to lead you to the next step and the next and the next. And I have found very much, in the sisterhood and brotherhood of the yoga medicine seva community, many people who are willing to take that step along with us. And that's been so incredible.
I love that. I think there's a lot of really powerful messages in there for people listening, regardless of what you're interested in, whether this is something you're passionate about, or you have another cause that you're passionate about, or you're looking for something to be that sort of anchor in your life. I love the idea of start by starting. I also really love the idea of focusing on the positive and focusing on action oriented outcomes. And this was something that the girls and women themselves sound pretty staunch on. Like, well, I don't want to be defined by the worst days of my past. I want to be defined by what I can do right now and what I might achieve in the future. So even from the girls and women involved, that sounded like a pretty clear message.
Very much so. I think that, initially when everyone was just learning about this issue, there was, people really felt like, oh, your girls should tell their story, because that will help them
Yeah,
in
get
some
it
way. And
out.
it is definitely in our culture, in our cultures of, Western cultures, that's kind of a thing,
Mm.
that, you share publicly about what happened, but it is definitely not a thing in Asian culture. And I didn't mention earlier, but most of our work is in India and Nepal. And we've recently added some programs in Kenya. These are global hotspots for sexual and gender based violence.
Mm.
But in Asian culture, and I'm increasingly learning also in Eastern African culture, sharing about sexual violence is not a thing that people are comfortable doing, or that would, if you did it, it would really limit the possibilities for your life thereafter. It might be very difficult to get married, have a family, or have a different kind of career outside of being an activist. So therefore, we never ask anyone to do that. A few, very, very few girls have really stood up and said, I want to do that because they want to, become a leader in this space. And there's one or two people who've chosen to share their story, but the vast majority of them are really interested in their own personal healing, rebuilding their lives, and surely helping others, but not necessarily by telling what's happened to them. And again, as you said, it's really about moving forward and figuring out what is it for them that they can do to move forward. And that is actually a very critical first step, and it doesn't come immediately. When I first started, made many mistakes. And one of them was, working with girls who had been recently rescued in a shelter environment, and be like, oh, we have so many great options. Do you want to go back and go back to school? We have this jewelry program, and if you'd like to learn computer programming, or get literacy, and like throwing options out. And people were just paralyzed because, in the
Mm.
immediate aftermath, they are just in survival mode, and they're really
Mm.
trying to live from one moment to the next. And so, obviously learned that first to really give someone time to feel safe, and to feel like more regulated where they're not under attack from every direction.
Mm,
And there's a lot of tools we can talk about that helps get that person to that place. Talk therapy is certainly one of them, but healing, movement, yoga are also really big part of that. And then once that they're feeling safe and they're feeling, a little bit hopeful, then we are the options people, and we like to come in with a variety of choices because these girls and women have been denied choice their entire life,
mm,
even before being trafficked. They most likely were born into families where they were expected, to have a life of domestic work and drudgery, and already caring for younger kids and taking care of the household and getting married young. That those were the prescribed options for them, and they weren't given a whole lot of choices. Probably in
mm.
many cases weren't encouraged or allowed to go to school, or there wasn't resources for that. So we really like to, have them, once they're in that healed place, to really think about, here is an array of choices, and what would you like? And that is really the a beautiful first step, is just getting them to identify, well, yeah, kind of always wanted to be a hairdresser, or I like I like computers, or wow, I really do want to go back to school. I might be 16, 17, and need to go to kindergarten, but we can figure that out. And there are many people who do indeed choose that route.
And maybe that's something that, you can bring to the table being somebody who's grown up in the West where, education is highly prized and choice is, an assumption, such a valuable, such a highly prized thing that it is an assumption in our lives that we get to choose what we want to do, which direction we want to go. Yeah, that you can,
Mhm.
I don't think you'd be able to do it any other way than to say, well, what are you interested in then? Which way do you want to go? Yeah. Well, maybe we take a step back and talk about the survivors and go into a little bit more detail about what challenges they're facing even after they've been rescued from the abusive situation. And you said, understandably, there's a sort of decompression period where all of the skills that served them in that environment, like detaching from their bodies and not thinking about the future and not feeling any feelings, have to sort of be relearned. So maybe talk about some of the challenges that the survivors face, even once they're out of whatever environment they've been in and you have them somewhere that is physically safe.
And even, I mean, I would say even a step back before that is that many of them cannot return to their family of origin or to
Mm,
their home village, because the people in their family might have been involved in trafficking them, or close neighbors and community members. They might be coming from such extreme poverty that it was endangering, for them, and remains endangering for them to go home. Or they
Now, do
may
you think
not
it's
even.
important to stay there? Because my instinctive reaction when I learned that was, of course, horror and judgment. How could you, as a parent or a family member or a neighbor, knowingly put a girl or a child into this situation? But it's not that straightforward, is it? Because those people don't have all that many choices either.
Right, and so many of them have been tricked. The traffickers are so clever and organized,
Yeah,
and I would say in the majority of cases, parents think that their kids are going to work, in a home, or in a factory, in a restaurant. Like, very, very few people would, willingly allow
knowingly.
this. There are some communities, there are some groups where this has become so normalized, that people do know and they still allow. But I'd say that's very much the minority. I think most parents, either they have been themselves tricked, and the traffickers are sending people back saying it's great and I'm working, and I have these nice clothes and a car, and it's great, and they're not talking about what really happens. Or the poverty is so extreme that to stay home is life endangering.
Mhm,
um, and so, parents don't know what to do, and maybe they're told something. Well, your daughter, well, she'll be able to go to school. She'll be working in a restaurant. They don't really know the level, of the violence that is going to face their child. In
mm,
many cases, too, girls first get into some other kind of vulnerable situation. Maybe it's an early or a child marriage, and then they become vulnerable and they're removed from their support systems of family. Or the family loses there's a drought, and the family loses like what little they had, and the kids go willingly to another city or another country looking for work. But again, they're so vulnerable when they get there. So there's a lot of different ways that people end up in this. And I
Mm.
would say mostly not parents knowingly souling them, and almost never, um, ever that I've seen anyone being snatched off the street or randomly kidnapped into this. There's always like systemic issues at the bottom of it that
Yeah.
have led to it. And it's usually been generational poverty
Mm.
and the low status of women in the community that's driving it.
And that's part of the reason why many of them can't go back is firstly, there may be no resources there for them. There may be no jobs, there may be not enough food. And also there's a stigma attached to the work that they've wound up doing through no choice of their own. That means that they're not considered sort of suitable to slot back into normal life.
Absolutely, and in some cases, they may not remember where home is if they were
Oh,
very young, when they're trafficked, which is, especially hard and tragic. But what we really try to focus on is the first thing is making sure that whether they are able to go home with, some social work supervision, or in many cases that's not possible, but getting them into a safe and very supportive shelter home environment. And the advantage to that, I mean, obviously everyone wants to go home, and that's the goal, and you work towards it with them. But the advantage to being the shelter home is there's all these resources, and there's food on the table, and there's a chance to go back to school even if you are 16 or 19 years old. There's tutors, and there's dance classes, and there's just a lot of counseling and
and I
safety,
imagine
and
too, a lot of other people who have been through what you've been through. Yeah.
which is huge. I think it would be
Yeah.
so incredibly isolating to, go home and to be alone with this. And I think it's actually better in those initial months or years for them to be in this supportive environment and getting all these resources and being around all these other girls who truly understand.
Mm.
And as survivor leadership itself grows in our programs and in others, then there becomes these amazing, inspiring mentors all around them, who are also able to guide them, through this healing journey and say, "I understand, I get it, and here's how I got where I am today." And that's absolutely huge. I think one of the hardest things, and especially, here in America, as people try to recover from trafficking, is often they are kind of the only one, or it
Mm.
feels very, very like an isolating and horrific experience, as you mentioned earlier, that not everyone even wants to talk about.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in the shelter home environment, it's out in the open, and that's a really wonderful thing. So for us, that first step is really getting them into that safe place, doing the medical care that they require, and providing that counseling. And then, just step by step, we have these wonderful social workers and counselors who really have developed some very innovative approaches. I mentioned it earlier, and it's really, I guess, very personal to me that nonverbal healing modalities are so critical at this point. So many girls don't have the words for what
Mm.
happened to them. They might not even know the words, especially if they were very young, or if this isn't something that was ever talked about in their family, probably wasn't for most of them.
Mm.
Or even if they, know the words, have the words, these are very, very hard things to talk about. And not everyone is ready or prepared to do so, even in the privacy of a therapeutic relationship. So we really, in those early months, focus on nonverbal healing modalities. Arts is a big, huge part for us. Movement, dance therapy, yoga, painting a mural, just really anything that can kind of get them out of their head and into their body and into
Mhm.
being able to express or create, seems to be very, very powerful. And then, moving from that to maybe games and play that allows them to work through what's happened and also kind of rediscover who they are,
Mhm. Be
what
kids
they
again.
like. The thing about preference is it's like so, obvious to us. What's your favorite color? What's your favorite food? And we have these answers the ready, right? We know what we like. We've always been asked and allowed to choose. But in their culture, even before being trafficked,
Mm.
it wasn't, there weren't maybe options, or what they wanted was not important. So we have to kind of like think of games that allow them to identify and express who they are, what they like, and that's the first step to then figuring out, well, out of all that, where can I go from here?
Yeah, I think that's so important because I remember the first time I went to the States, I was 12 or 13. And even coming from Australia, I found the level of choice there absolutely paralyzing, completely overwhelming. Where I might have two choices at home, I had 20 choices in the States. So I do think that's something that a lot of people would underestimate, that there's a process to knowing who I am, how I feel. This feeling means I like it. This feeling means I don't. This feeling means I'm interested. This feeling means I'm not. And then to go from there to the cognitive process of how do I rank these choices? Which one appeals to me the most? What are the pros and the cons? That's a real skill set that you just can't assume that everybody has, even though it's something that we in the West now probably take for granted.
We do take it for granted, and like I say,
Mm,
I really had a learning curve to understand really what it even was. This thing that it's maybe not proper to want something. You
mhm,
really always are supposed to be thinking of others, especially as a woman or a girl. So again, with games and play, we kind of hit on some techniques that allow people to to just begin to think about that. And I also think,
mhm,
like, in an environment of being trafficked, whether it's in brothel or it's for labor, you survive by not wanting anything, not being present in your body, like
mhm.
withdrawing from and just like you're surviving minute to minute. The short-term memory is affected, because you survive by forgetting. So then you have to kind of bring that back and come back into yourself. I think there's a real spiritual element to this as well, of being able to invite your soul back into your body after you've survived by pushing that away.
Wow. Yeah, and then I guess the long-term aim is to give the survivors options where they don't have to return to that kind of work again. They have the means to support themselves. Many of them have children, so the means to support themselves and their children, and that's no easy task. So let's talk about the vocational education side and what you've learned along the way there.
For sure. And I think, before I even get into that, I want to say there's sort of different groups, right? There's
Mhm,
the shelter home group that we've talked about, girls who've been rescued and maybe put into this environment. Then there's increasingly many girls and women who it's more of a community intervention in a red light area or in a slum community, and where you're really trying to break intergenerational cycles
mhm,
of poverty and exploitation. So the two powerful tools we've got there: education and economic empowerment or vocational training. And in partnership with seva, we've supported girls in many different vocational paths, including jewelry making, computer training, beautician, sewing, which is a big thing, counseling, and really just lots of other different careers, nursing and healthcare. Um,
mhm.
Really just trying to, baking, bakery, and cafe management's another really popular one. But we really try to emphasize this is not a quick fix. It's a long walk to freedom, and you gotta be
Yeah.
walking to people with people all along the way. It's a minimum of 2 or 3 years, and that's even if just with a high-risk girl, not necessarily has yet been exploited, but someone's been
Mhm,
exploited, and you've gotta be willing to walk with them for 5 years, for 6 years, you could however long it takes. If they're very young, it could be 10 years,
mhm,
it could be 15 years, and so you're really trying to walk alongside them and make sure that they continue to have these resources of education, vocational training, and counseling and supportive community that's going to be able to get this person out of it and then really break these systemic and intergenerational cycles.
mm.
So
Yeah,
part of it
side
is
of
too is learning about your human rights.
mhm,
So many girls and women don't even realize that this is illegal. They're like, well, we my family took a loan, so I got to repay it, or you know, you think can be forced into a child marriage, or that you don't have the right to own property, or that can be taken from you because you've
mm,
never been told about human rights and had a chance to learn about them. But learning about your own human rights and everyone's human rights is itself a really strong preventative resource, because then okay, There's phone numbers you can call. You can go to the police. And many girls may have thought like the police might have been coming, for free services into the red light areas. The police might have been corrupt, or there may have been some corrupt police. That's an area where there's been a huge amount of improvement in the last 20 years, is the
Mhm.
sensitization of police, and the more and more police who are really becoming an advocate alongside NGOs in combating this. So that's awesome. But many people, may not realize that they could go to the police, or they could call Childline or Helpline, and that this is illegal and that there are resources for them. So that's another piece of it, is making sure that
Mhm.
everyone who comes to this program can become an advocate for themselves and others, at least in knowing what their rights are and what other people's rights are. And so many of them, that this is
Yeah.
the coolest part, I really get excited about, is so many of them in different ways have become heroic advocates for others. Whether it's pulling their mom and sister out of a red light area, whether it's literally doing rescues on the border, or one of our beneficiaries has started a whole anti-trafficking program and school in her village, and it's helping hundreds of people there. So many of them are teachers. They're working in our organization or in other organizations, working with vulnerable kids. And that is a place where people do feel inspired and wanting to share their story with those
Mm.
kids, so that it becomes an inspiration to others, and gives hope to those young people. Well, I grew up in a shelter home. I went through the same thing. My family's back in the red light area, but look, I've taken this step and this step and this step, and look where I am today.
Yeah, in yoga medicine, we talk a lot about the ripple effect where, one little drop spreads out almost infinitely in all directions. And that's exactly what you're describing here, where one girl or one woman can spread to all of the people that she encounters once she knows what her rights are, what her options are, and has a sense of empowerment that she can do something about it, not just for herself, but for other people. Yeah, that was another phrase in your book, living heroically, that I thought was a pretty powerful and empowering phrase.
It's the best part of my work, is like,
Mm,
I used to think like, if I can help one girl, that was my dream, and I was blessed to achieve it. But now I see, like, if one girl I helped can help a girl or 100, that is even more incredible. It's an incredible
mhm,
feeling, and I feel that with Anjali, the one young woman I was just talking about, who's started a program back in her village. I feel that with Sonali, who's, she grew up in a shelter home, and now she's teaching non-school going kids in a red light area and getting them back into school. Or Sumaya, who's on our management team. And all of them are, kind of like shining stars. But there's many, many others who are just, I mean, I won't even say just, who have become a working person or a mom, or working in their community, but they're still also making sure that everyone in their circle is remaining safe, that their nieces and their neighbors and those kids are not being trafficked. Everyone, has gotten some tools and resources, and so many of them are using it in big and small ways, to help others. And gradually that safety net is spreading, it's becoming wider. And the number of girls that we as an organization can serve, is limited. But when you start thinking about
mm.
all of them and what they can do, it's absolutely exponential.
I imagine that there are still some times that sadness or frustration or anger or despair kind of get the best of you and overcome you. So what do you do when that happens? How do you get back to focusing on what you've achieved so far and what you can continue to achieve with this ripple effect spreading outwards?
I mean, of course that happens, because
Mm,
sometimes you just sort of think you've heard everything,
mm,
and then you hear something, you're like, oh man, that's just like really unbearable. And you can, obviously spiral into despair around it. I am really very committed to my self-care practices. And it's not just one, it's like all, yoga and running and time with my beloved family and my
mm.
beloved animals, and really spending a lot of time in nature, and journaling and getting counseling myself, and drawing, and every kind of art and therapeutic movement that I can think of. So really, really taking care of yourself is key, because I'm going to keep you're going to keep hearing really, really hard things doing this work. That part I'm not going to lie about. You are going to face down like demons that are in human form, and things that just feel too much to carry. And I just try to remember, like, I don't actually have to carry this pain. Um, my I can love someone, be compassionate, put that pain down, get support for it. But really, my role and focus here is to offer opportunities, love, kinship, and really, what a writer that I really enjoy. He talks about you're not responsible for all the outcomes. Like you can't be, and you're going to be in despair if that's your goal is to like fix people, fix their lives, have it just doesn't always work out for so many different reasons, but I'm responsible for providing options and hopeful opportunities and also doing so in a loving and compassionate environment of kinship where everyone's going to feel, I have a place here. I am not alone. That kinship
Mm.
and love that I can successfully create. If my mission and goal and ambition is to fix everything, I'm going to be in constant despair and discouragement. But if my mission is to provide hopeful opportunities in an atmosphere of kinship and love, I feel like I can do that.
Yeah, I'm already hearing some really important themes come out. I mean, the first one that you mentioned was when you see something that you feel called to help with, no matter how big or impossible it seems, start by starting. And I think that the hidden part of that that you've spoken around, but maybe not named completely, is you can't just do that bloody mindedly. You've got to listen, start, make mistakes, learn from them, change tack, make more mistakes, learn from them, change tack. So there is a part of that start by starting that is really humble and clear about your place in the process, which is really what you finished up your self-care practices by talking about there. You're not there to fix. Unfortunately, you're not a fairy godmother. You can't wave a wand. So you have to be really clear on what your part is in the process. And that requires some real humility, I think, to be able to say, I can't do everything, but I can do this piece.
Can do this piece. And even with this piece, I'm going to make so many mistakes. And like, that's okay. And like getting hung up on, oh, that didn't work. We're constantly failing and we're
Hmm.
constantly succeeding too.
Yeah.
And I think being humble about it. I mean, I haven't talked yet about our local partners, but that is such a huge part of the work is that we aren't
Mm.
doing it alone. We aren't coming in with answers. We are coming in with support and questions and learning alongside amazing, amazing local leaders. In the beginning, we had to do that because, I came in not knowing anything about this or having worked in this region. And I was very fortunate to find local partner organizations and local leaders who took us under their wing and really taught us
Mm.
the ropes and showed us how we could be the most effective. And we learned together side by side over 20 years. And this is 20 years old next year. So
Wow.
we needed them in the beginning, but now we just can't imagine being without our local partners. We wouldn't want to be, even if, maybe we've learned a lot and we could do stand a bit more on our own feet. We don't want to because we
Yeah.
love working in partnership. We love finding these amazing grassroots local organizations. Some of them are tiny and, they're just doing it like with the money they cobble together from their own friends. And some of them are more professionalized and further along, but either way, they're these exceptional groups that really know what works in their exact context.
Hmm.
um, and that have already courageously started these amazing things, and we're able to come alongside them, and then together, have a much bigger impact than either one of us could have without the other. That's a relationship can be funding, but it's usually so much deeper than that. It's like strategic, working together, finding solutions, like kids going back and forth between the different
Mm.
programs depending on their needs and who can help them in that moment. Leadership coming and going and staff coming and going. I mean, it's just another amazing part of our work is the joy of being able to find solutions together with these amazing local leaders. And that's an area too, like, to just keep being humble. It's like we don't have the answers for this village in rural Nepal, but Anjali does, or this
Hmm.
in this village in northern Kenya, but Wanjiru does. And together we're going to be able to like make those solutions be more effective and help more girls and have more fun, all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Putting the fun back into fundamental human rights was something else I wrote down from the book. I
It's
really love that
important.
phrase
I
as
mean,
well.
these are so dark and difficult, and you have to bring fun and joy and a sense of humor and a like super relentlessly positive attitude that okay, today this worked and or that didn't, but tomorrow, tomorrow's another day, and we're just going to keep fighting for each and every woman and girl and some boys, some amazing boys in our program as well.
Mm.
Keep fighting for them, keep creating these circumstances for them, and if it didn't work out today, maybe it'll go better tomorrow.
And to me, the fun side of it, the space for levity and lightness and enjoyment, that's so potent because not to say that there's no point rescuing somebody from a horrible situation just to introduce them to a life that's worthy and serious, but to me, one of the big points of living is the little bubbles of joy that come up, the little glimmers of, the little things that make you happy, the belly laugh that surprises you, connecting with somebody over something that's silly or fun. This is a really core and important part of the human existence. And if that's not part of the future for these survivors, then it's almost an incomplete survival, isn't it? If they're just, worthy and well meaning and sensible folk that don't get to have any fun, they're still lacking an essential part of their humanity if they can't enjoy it.
Oh, I totally agree. My first book was called This Is No Ordinary Joy. And that title was inspired by the fact that, to my shock, when I first started working in shelter homes and in red light areas, the joy that people expressed and had after having experienced the worst that life
Mm.
could offer, it was a higher level of joy than I'd seen before. And there was this kind of exuberance and like deep joy that they had and that they shared and that they infused in me and everyone else. And I was like, what is going on? And I think it's about, they had come through the worst and longest winter, and when the spring came, they took it, and they were just dancing with joy among it. And so could we all, by like, let's, yeah, like you said, let's take the tiny tiny joyful moments of every day and the big joyful moments and become more like them,
Mm.
more like
I
the
mean,
survivors, because
there's a special power to joy that exists not in naivety, but in knowledge of how bad life can be, and yet still finding fun and enjoyment in it. There is a real power to that I can imagine being quite infectious. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
For me it has been. For me it has been. I feel like I'm living a very blessed and joyful life. And yes, there are moments of despair, but they're way, way fewer than
Mm.
you would expect. Most of the time, we are on the side of hope, helping to create opportunities, having laughs, having fun, you know, having family, wonderful daughters and sisters, moving
Mm.
forward together. That's mostly what we're doing.
Yeah, I guess in some ways you're not the best role model in the sense that um, you've completely changed your life and your husband's. This nonprofit is now what you both do with all of your, with all of your work time, and this is your primary focus. And I think for somebody that could be a little intimidating, if I want to help, but I'm certainly not willing to quit my job and sell my house and move my kids. I'm certainly not willing to go that far. Should I not bother? I'm sure you'd have some words of advice for that person.
Yes. I mean, I would say, don't worry, you don't have to do that. There's so many ways to get involved, and through Yoga Medicine Save a Foundation is a great place to start. We have a trip going. It's in January 2026. You got some time,
Hmm.
and people fundraising the money, so they're already helping before they even get there. And then when they get there, we do an immersive experience, bringing everyone's different talents and love to the women and girls that we work with. So that's a great place to start, or just getting involved in, fundraising, donating through the Yoga Foundation is the Yoga Medicine Save Foundation is a great place to start. But really, like for me, I don't know. I'm kind of an all in kind of person, and I just went for it. I will say that my husband worked with me for 12 years, but when our second child started college, he did go, I have to get a different job because it was like too much.
Fair enough.
But no, I mean, yeah, I really feel like you can start small, you can start big, you can change one person's life I won't say easily, but we all have access to be able to do that, whether in this issue or any other. And maybe at some point, someone out there is going to be called to like go crazy and go all in there, but it's definitely not necessary. Like hundreds, I will say even thousands of people have helped over the years at all different levels.
Yeah, I think that's really important to say. The expectation from this podcast is definitely not that everybody just, picks up stumps, quits their life, and goes commando. But do what you can. I think the things that I've picked out of this conversation so far that have really spoken to me are start by starting, and be be a listener. Start and then listen, make mistakes and learn from them, have successes and learn from them. Don't feel that you need to do it alone. Have your partners, have the survivors helping you. The more the ripple effect spreads, the more effective the work is. And also the patient approach. Unfortunately, right now in the world we live in, there isn't an app that you can click on to free people from sexual or gender-based violence or from human trafficking. It takes time. You've got to give people, you've got to find somewhere safe for them to be. You've got to give them space to heal and to feel, and give them access to a wide range of things, from obviously education and human rights education, but also the arts you spoke about, which shouldn't surprise me, but does. Painting, drawing, singing, dancing, yoga, getting back into your body in ways that feel a little bit safer and more positive and more expressive. And then maybe you can start talking about vocational education and higher education and an economic future that's independent. And yeah, and that's the dream, but it takes a patient, multifaceted approach. It takes a bunch of people, and it takes that persistent attitude of sometimes feeling despair, but trying to stay relentlessly positive despite. What do you think? Have I encapsulated the big nuggets of our conversation?
Yes, you said it better than I did. I think you should cut me out of this podcast and just say that. People have,
Any
people are pushed for time. Like that really just
just
nailed it.
listen to the summary. Please don't just listen to the summary. In fact, you should read the book. You should read the book. I read it. It was at times a little confronting, but mostly a really empowering and positive message of what humans will do when given opportunities to feel safe and to grow and to bring others along the journey with them. So I will, of course, link to your website, and to your TED Talk. You're a celebrity. TED Talk. We also had a previous episode of the podcast with Amanda Cunningham, who works with you and works with the Yoga Medicine Saver Foundation. So there's another kind of snippet of the conversation to learn more about the issue. What else do you want to leave people with today? Any kind of final thoughts?
Mm. I have one final thought, which just came to me. It was just like one of my favorite yoga teachers at my studio. And you'll be like getting into some posture and like getting all intense about it. She's like, give yourself a break. You know, it's just yoga. And I want to say, like, give yourself a break. It is, yes, it's important, but let's just enter it into it with a bit of a lightness and give ourselves a break when we don't do things perfectly, or we're not ready to sell our houses, or whatever it is. And then you try something and some of it works and tons of it doesn't. And let's just all give ourselves and each other a break as we try to move forward together. And let's just try to bring a little bit more lightness and a little bit more joy to this issue and all of the other critical issues facing our world today.
Well, I think that's a lovely place to finish it. And it was something that was a theme in the conversation too, the power of joy, the power of laughter and fun and optimism. It is one of the ways that we connect as humans, and it's maybe the most powerful way that we heal.
Hmm.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for your time. I really appreciate you making time for us today. And we will link in the show notes to your website for people who want to know more or want to help in some way. And do know, if you've ever done a yoga medicine course, a percentage of our profits go to the Saver Foundation. So you're already helping a little bit without even knowing it. So isn't that nice? Thanks
Thank you
very
so
much,
much,
Sarah.
Rachel. I loved talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you liked the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com. Check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine, or you can email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being part of our Yoga Medicine community. The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.